Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Frankenstein chat. It's the 133rd edition. And for those of you watching on video, you can see that we have a guest. Hello, Louise.
Hi.
Yeah,
Hi,
it's great for you
Louise.
to join us.
Hi,
We'll sort of
Stan.
do a formal introduction in a minute. And of course, now that it's been revealed, those listening on the podcast, you'll know that we have a guest. But in a way, we're sort of halfway through, a little bit further in January. But it's I mean, in a way, there's just so much going on in education that we are never short of things to talk about. And just to give you a little bit of background, before we record, we always sort of just chat with our guest and with Stan to make sure that we don't double up on these issues. But I have to say, it's been quite hard this week to sort of eliminate it so that Louise has one, I have one, and Stan has one. So there's a lot we're going to miss out, unfortunately. But I think there'll be enough to interest you this week. So, how are you, Stan?
Blue sky. I don't know what we've done to deserve it this morning, but can't wait for the weather to get good enough to go out and walk and get some fresh air and things. It's like it was dangerous yesterday to go out on the paths and stuff outside, and you don't know if the ambulance crews are in or out. So
Well, I've started jogging again. The last time I did was at the end of November. And I had I've had four sort of decent jogs, but I've got to about 4 kilometers. And but fortunately, it started to snow a couple of nights ago, so I've not been able to do it for a couple of nights. But I think it's going to pick up this weekend. Anyway, Louise, hello, thank you for joining us. Louise Salmon.
Hi, nice to join you.
Yeah, do you want to just let our sort of friends who are watching, listening, know who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. My name's Louise Salmon. I'm currently the chief exec at an independent training company called Primary Goal. That's my current role. I have a fairly long history in education, majoritively further education. So I've been a director of teaching, learning quality and a digital team, and I've also worked in vocational and apprenticeship qualifications. But throughout my whole career over the last 14 years, I've always been connected to schools the whole way through.
Brilliant. So what is Primary Goal then?
So Primary Goal is an independent training provider. We deliver apprenticeship training and we also deliver non-apprenticeship training. So topics like functional skills, maths and English, or vendor regulated qualifications. So pieces that are specific to industry as well. And one-day courses, so things like introduction to cybersecurity. All of it is based around digital, cyber, ICT, and network engineer, those sort of subject areas.
Now, I saw a tweet from you, Louise. And the tweet was after we had spoken. We've spoken a couple of times over the last few months, but there was a tweet you put out that drew quite a lot of attention, didn't it, Louise? It was all to do with £16 million, I think.
Yes.
Just explain that tweet.
I was thinking, which one have I popped out? Yes. So we're really fortunate at Primary Goal, and I think it's very much driven through the integrity that we have at the company, and that runs through all of our staff, and also the ethos that we have. So we are approached regularly by large conglomerates, and they do approach us to say that we've got this pot of levy apprenticeship money that is sitting there unused, and we would really like you to use it. So just before Christmas, we were approached by a very large conglomerate, and they said, look, we've got over £16 million that we have gathered from different points in the business. We've decided that actually we're more than likely not going to utilise that. We've taken a look at your programmes, we've taken a look at your culture, and we'd really like you to utilise it. There is no hard and fast stipulation. There is a request that they have a list of postcodes for deprived areas, and if we can utilise it in those areas first, then brilliant. If not, then it is there. But however, we are to try and prioritise those postcodes. To just put that into perspective, that's probably about 80% of the postcodes in England. So it isn't that it's only 10% of the postcodes,
Right.
it's pretty much everywhere. Alongside that 16 million, I'll give you another example. Last October, we were already in discussions with a large banking corporation, and they offered us £980,000, and we utilised for one area of schools 510 of that, and then we've been offered more again since.
Right.
So the mixture in the large conglomerates, they range from Amazon, Microsoft, Lloyds Banking, the cooperative, all the way through to all sorts. And we are very fortunate that we are approached.
Brilliant. I mean, for those of you who are not aware, why the answer is, why do these companies have large sums of unspent apprenticeship levy money? And a good example, you mentioned the Co-op before, an organisation I've been associated with for a number of years. They struggle to pay their levy because if they have a store manager or a member of staff who they want to send on a training course, they can get the cost of the training course covered by the levy, but they can't get the cost of the replacement member of staff who takes their place in the store for that day. Actually restricts the use of that levy, and the Co-op have put a lot, as I suppose I know a number of northern businesses have tried to put a lot of pressure on the government to free up the use of that levy. I think before you mentioned there was a vast sum of money of unclaimed levy.
Yeah.
What was that figure again you mentioned before we started recording?
It's absolutely ridiculous. So last year, around £770 million of unspent apprenticeship levy money went to the Treasury, because if you don't spend it within 24 months, it goes to the Treasury. It doesn't come back to you as a business. So it is another form of tax that is removed from the business at any point when you go beyond the £3 million pay bill mark. So it's not your turnover, it's not your revenue, it's not your profit, it is on your £3 million pay bill. And that volume of money, £770 million, that isn't being utilised for educational purposes, that then goes into the Treasury, absolutely blows my mind in most cases. And what we find is that many companies don't understand the portal to be able to log in to access, to take a look, to see actually, well, how much have we paid in, what is there, what can we utilise, what has dropped off the back end, or when do we need to utilise it by. And also a lot of companies don't understand the fact that they can levy share. So they can actually gift their levy money to other businesses. The third point, and just going back to what you said there with regards to taking the day out of work for training, yes, the apprenticeship training has to take place in the working day. However, the working day is based upon the contract of the individual person. The rules did change this year. So apologies, last year. So 1st of August 22, the ruling did change, and it was always previously based on the phrase, you had to have 20% off the job training. That has been adapted because the DfE have taken on board the suggestions made, because if you look at somebody that's working a 5-day working week, the businesses can't afford realistically for somebody to be out of the business 1 day a week unless they've budgeted and planned for that. And it is doable, and I have worked with many apprentices, and that is a doable piece. However, you can adjust the delivery so that you can release staff in block release. You can release them, their contract may take them over a working weekend, so there could be weekend workshops. Their contract may take them into the evenings, there could be evening workshops. And equally, now it is based on a 6 hours average, so it isn't based on 1 day a week out of your 5-day week. It is now based on 6 hours average a week. So you could theoretically gather up those 6 hours and release on a block, or
just for an hour and a half.
Absolutely. There are so many different ways that you can now look at the way that you plan and deliver your apprenticeships, and that's also really key, that you meet the needs of the employer, as whoever it is that is planning and delivering that training, that you're meeting the needs of the employer from a delivery perspective, you're meeting the needs of the employer from the skills and knowledge perspective, and then you're meeting the needs of the learner. from all of that as well. And that's really key, and it's hugely crucial, those conversations at the very beginning, that they support everybody in the training of that apprentice. And I'm very fortunate the team I work with are particularly good at doing that, listening to what the employers need, listening to what the learners need, and then ensuring that our delivery program meets those needs.
Wow. Well, we've never had that level of detail, have we, Stan?
No, I
In
was just going to say,
133 editions of this chat, we've never got to that.
my favourite apprentice was in one of our outdoor ed centres in Lancashire to do administration, and he finished his apprenticeship and retired the same day because he was
did he?
he was in
Love
his
him.
60s when he started his apprenticeship.
Yeah.
And it just showed, because people don't realise that apprentice is necessarily a 16 to 18 year old.
Absolutely not. No.
I think a lot of businesses at the moment, it is about reskilling, particularly, you know, as the business transforms. You know, we talk a lot here, and Louise is involved in digital, but actually businesses going through this digital transformation need to retrain staff, and jobs fall off. But you know, certainly for large businesses, that when I speak to them, it's not about, they are interested in the younger workforce, but they're very concerned about how they can keep the staff that they value, who understand the principles and the values of the business, how they can keep them working for the business. So I mean,
theoretically, you could say if you're employed and you have a pulse, you could go on an apprenticeship. However, many people say to me, is it just for 16 to 18-year-olds? Absolutely not. It's from anybody that is 16. As long as they're employed, it doesn't actually matter how old they are. And you're dead right. It is about upskilling the current workforce as much as getting the new workforce in, and then building that correct skill set that's needed for that employer.
Well, we're on it. Before we get on to you, Stan, for what's caught your eye, I just wanted to say, because this is linked a little bit, I had a very interesting conversation with Professor Jackie Carter, who's at Manchester University, who's looking at how you prepare young people for the place of work. And I think there's something for some young people, there is a sort of like a position that there needs to be a little bit more emphasis on the preparation for apprenticeship even. You know, so it's a very interesting bit of research she's done, and we're going to get her on as a guest, Stan. I think it's going to be an interesting with the work she's done, the research she's done. It's a challenge, I think, for young people who are in sort of who are in sort of poorer communities, who don't have access to a sort of broader range of working environments. You know, some of them are really struggling. You know, they might secure an apprenticeship, but they drop out of the apprenticeship fairly quickly, not because they can't do the work, because they just don't understand how that business is working, what the expectations are of them. And I think there's a lot that Jackie's done, and also other businesses that have done to sort of try and bridge that gap. Anyway, Stan. I'm still taking away what Louise is saying about apprenticeships. It's spinning around in my head. But anyway, Stan, what's caught your eye this week?
Strikes, I think, in teachings and head teachers, and the head teachers one particularly, because of the legal requirement that ballots have to go by post. And I saw something this morning that suggested that maybe 3 out of 4 ballots didn't arrive at people who were voting. And you think, why is that? Well, 1, postage. 2, it was Christmas. 3rd, the post office has been on strike. And you just think, in this age, and I knew we were going to be talking digital, is it still right to have a postal system by which people can have a view? I just think it's incredibly backward thinking that we're stuck with a postal
But it's
ballot.
made this. I mean, I think the rules were set up before the digital revolution.
Yeah.
But actually, I don't think there's much enthusiasm within the current government to switch it anytime soon, is there?
No, definitely not. Except, didn't they find it more useful not to use a postal ballot when they were doing a major appointment?
Yes, they did. Yeah, well, only a few months ago, I think.
Yeah. And the other thing about the strikes is how difficult this is for school leaders, because you want to support your colleagues that are on strike, but you've still got to manage an organisation where children are the thing you need to protect most. And I've been ahead while union action has gone on, but I've not been ahead. I wasn't ahead through an actual strike.
I was a deputy, and I was a member of the NAHT that were not striking. And I remember the head teacher and I, it was one of those sort of strikes where staff would not work during lunchtime, or and it became so children had to go home, and we had just for an hour, and it was in a really tough area. They simply weren't coming back in the afternoon, and we weren't sure where they were going. So we decided to sort of try and keep as many as we could. I do remember being on the playground with, I don't know how many children, lots and lots of children, just the two of us, and the fire alarm went off in the school. And what that was somebody had got into the school, pressed the fire alarm, because that kept everybody away. And so the robber went through members of staff's bags and everything while we were on the top playground looking after all of these children. So but the thing for me is it was particularly challenging, because it felt as though I was very sympathetic, but there was nothing I didn't feel as though I could simply walk out and join their strike and leave kids just roaming around the streets of Stockport. It was a very challenging time.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of nonsense about it, isn't there? Having a day strike is going to ruin children's lives. Oh, but we're having a day off for a coronation, and that's okay. That won't ruin their lives. It's the same day off. And as I think one of the journalists said, half term's coming up. That's 5 days off. But I feel for head teachers wondering just how to manage this and how to cope with it without losing the relationship they have with their colleagues who may or may not be on strike, and individual teachers, where one is now on strike because their unions voted to go out and others aren't. I often think, what you talked about then, Frank, was actually a work to rule, wasn't it?
It was, yes.
A work to rule will be far more devastating.
It will.
Than a day's strike.
Because that loss, sorry, come to you, Louise, but there was this loss of them for lunchtime. It wasn't just the fact that there were no lunches. It was that aspect as well, but they were working to rule, and it was very, because it upset the relation. It upset the mood of the morning changed, because the kids knew about 11:30 we're getting ready for going home. So and there was also, the teachers felt as though they had to cram everything in. The whole atmosphere of the school changed simply because of that loss of 1 hour. So Louise, come to you, because I know you were trying to get in.
No, it's fine. I was privy to some conversations this week, and it was at a governor's meeting, and the governors were asking the head and deputy head how they were preparing, and they said, well, we can now actually ask if they're intending to strike. They don't have to tell us, obviously. Not one person in that room was against them striking. They knew that it was going to cause an issue, and they knew it was going to cause challenges. However, everybody, the feeling very much as I sat back and listened, was that people knew that there needed to be some sort of change. And in the room, there was actually a paediatric nurse who said, we don't want to strike. We don't want to close all of the paediatric trauma units across the south, because it would have closed all 3. She said that's the last thing we want to do, but we genuinely now are losing so many staff through leaving the NHS and going into bank, because they can earn twice the amount of money, which is then causing more impact on the NHS, or they're going off to different careers, and people are coming in for a certain amount of time, then meeting burnout. And I think this is exactly mirrored in the teaching profession. People come in with the gusto that they want to work in that profession, they want to make a change, impact future, and enjoy the career of supporting, working with, and improving lives for others, and then reach a point where they have to decide, well, either we keep going, and I try and fuel myself through that point, into the hope that I reach a salary where I can then, afford a mortgage, or even just to gather a deposit for a property, or I have to step away. and the consensus in the room was very much that nobody wanted striking to happen and nobody wanted the impact to happen on anybody. However, everybody had almost got to the point of, well, what else can we do? And I think that's really key for people to take away, and especially the decision makers. If people are feeling like they're at that point of what else can they do, we've had so many different strikes recently, and all for different reasons, and people can give the pros and cons to everything. But I think that's definitely something to consider of if this is getting to this point now, to this breaking point.
Yeah.
I don't think we're far from let's say, a general day of action.
Yeah.
Rather than a general, I don't think we're far from that. It only needs a bit of connectivity between the major unions to say, we're not getting anywhere.
Yeah.
With any of this.
Yeah.
And it appears the government just aren't prepared to talk. I was interested with the one with the I think it was the NAHT who had a meeting this week. Who the representatives from the education side said it was a completely useless meeting. That they'd not discussed anything, the government refusing to discuss pay, and the DfE have described it as a constructive talk.
I mean, the thing, if I can pick up, Louise, because the point you're making there was about, in effect, burnout. And I think the point you're going to talk about, what's caught your eye this week, is in a way a little bit linked to that, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. So I spotted Amanda Spielman gave an interview on Radio 5 and was discussing how she was really surprised at the age that youngsters have access to smartphones and smart devices. And I think if I was to think really carefully about the youngsters that I know, I absolutely know families where their youngsters have smartphones or access to a smart device at around a year old, probably. It maybe belong to a sibling, but they can still access it, or they're certainly given their own one potentially by the age of 3. That's the device that they have access to. And I was quite surprised to read that she was surprised. And I think when I read into it and looked
Sorry, that the way you said that, actually, that is quite telling.
Yeah,
I hadn't thought about that in that sense.
Yeah, so that's why I was surprised. So I was surprised that Amanda was surprised. Now, I've never met Amanda, and I will never give judgment on anybody that I haven't ever met. I think what she was trying to get across was the volume of children that have access to smart devices and the type of access that they have. I think that was really more of the point that she was potentially trying to get
around. For me, the issues around the online harm bill that's going through.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the thing, just to say, Louise, I think the issue here, Stan and I have both worked, in Ofsted, is the chief inspector may have a view on that, but it's got to be made clear this is an absolutely personal view, because there is no evidence gathering by Ofsted inspectors about how young children have got mobile phones. That's not coming out of any Ofsted inspection, and it's it that troubles Stan and I deeply, where it's, if she would only just stick to talking about stuff that her inspectors have inspected, that would be a much stronger position than the one where she ventures into, well, there's some research here that I'm interested in, or my personal view, because it holds out then the weakness of, well, your limited understanding, Amanda, which goes back to the initial shock of your response.
My surprise.
You're revealing now your significant weaknesses in your own experiences. And that's a very dangerous place to get to, because we're all limited by our experiences.
Absolutely. And when I thought about that more and the work that we're doing with staff in schools and staff in colleges, staff in universities, it sort of made me sort of take into consideration the other area in the press recently is the fact that 4 in 5 schools have experienced some sort of cyber incident. So when we're looking at the volume of work that educators have got on from a curriculum perspective, and then all of these added extras, plus we've been catapulted out the back end of COVID into this new digital world that everybody is semi-shocked about. We've muddled through, we've got used to using the devices, all the applications that we use, and there's still a huge misunderstanding with regards to the device that you use versus the operating platform that you use in the background. And my mind sort of then moved on to the other conversations I'd had with staff in schools about the fear around Ofsted inspections, and that actual fear that sometimes overtakes what they need to say or the way that they need to portray themselves to ensure that Ofsted get that broad understanding, that the staff in the schools have that broad knowledge of their schools and their individual school, their individual community, and the action points that they're individually working on. And I feel that there is a disconnect between the understanding of what is needed on the ground, which almost relates back to the strikes, of the skill set that is needed by staff in education, and it doesn't matter what level the staff member is at, for the understanding of the usage of digital and the impact of cyber attacks and what can trigger it, how you can prevent it, real easy pieces that you can do that can prevent you from being under attack. And then the training for staff around those conversations with Ofsted that are slightly more relaxed and open, so the Ofsted inspectors can see the hard work that is being done and the strategies that are being put in place, and not just the strategies, because everybody talks about strategies rather than actually the implementation of those strategies, but the actual work that's being on the ground, so that they can talk about all of the wonderful stuff that's happening, but actually all of the areas that require improvement freely and comfortably, so the Ofsted inspectors can then make that real open decision on it. Well, actually, yes, there may be requirements for improved outcomes here from an academic perspective. However, actually, these learners come in unfed, unwashed, unkept, and we look after them and we care for them. And so because we're doing that, they're now able to achieve far more academically than they could before. And the academic outcomes may be under the requirements of what Ofsted and the government are wanting. However, if that piece didn't happen, if that wellbeing piece didn't happen, or if the control of the digital devices didn't happen, those outcomes wouldn't be even remotely improving. And I think it's really important for staff in schools to have that support and that training around those conversations. It certainly happens in FE, and I think I'm very fortunate to have had that training and that experience and that exposure in FE of that training piece. And I think it would be extremely useful for the schools and the staff that have approached me to discuss how that training works, how those conversations take place, have actually said to me, I was actually worried to share with them our improvement plan. I was worried that we knew that we had these measures to make. And that's really concerning, and it's sad. It's
interesting what you say there. I mean, the issue here is that if only the coordinators, the head of departments, realise that their proficiency level, their capability level, their understanding of digital is likely to be far greater than the inspector who's inspecting them.
More than likely.
You know, I mean, it really, in a way, it's it ought to be, and in a way, I think what we're saying here, a little bit more humility on the Ofsted side.
Yeah.
They're actually sort of trying to get underneath the skin of what's going on. That's why they always want to emphasize the management or the leadership of the subject, because it doesn't require you to get too heavily involved in the more technical aspects of the subject.
But equally, when you say, but you know, we're having to do A, B, and C before these children are ready to learn, and therefore we should be allowed that space. The next thing is straight away, oh, you're asking for different standards. You're lowering standards, and there's a real elephant in the room where people have got to start saying, well, children that have to go through all these barriers that are significantly disadvantaged, are unlikely to achieve those outcomes. And instead of saying, you know, oh, we're trying to keep high expectations for all children, these are high expectations for the children to get through the barriers and the disadvantage that they've got to get to a point where you're not maybe at the academic level that the expectations of the country, but you were so far ahead of where you might have been had you not had that support. It should be recognised as a great success, but it isn't. And the
No.
first thing anybody says when you try and challenge that is, "Oh, so you're suggesting we have lower standards in
Well,
poorer
can
areas?"
I think I've said this on many occasions because I am the contextual value added man. You know, in the sense of when I worked with Ofsted, I drove this measure of contextual value added. So it wasn't just, you know, when we were assessing sort of academic standards, it was trying to take in a broader range of factors. And this work has been taken on by Professor George Leckie at Bristol University. And he pushed me towards, and I mentioned it, I think, a couple of weeks ago, a piece of research where consultants, when they're measured in terms of their effectiveness during operations, what's taken into account is the health environment in the community. So if you have a community where a lot of people are smoking, above average numbers of people smoking, then actually chest operations are likely to be less successful than in more wealthy areas, which is the way it works out generally, where there's very, you know, a low level of smoking. Now that is a contextual factor taken into account in terms of how effective it is. Why is it possible to do that with a consultant, but you can't do that with a head teacher? I don't understand that.
No, and I think
Nobody says to the consultant, "Oh, because this number died, you've got low expectations." No one says that.
no, I think it's definitely something to be taken into consideration. And I think it was interesting on your last podcast, you mentioned with regards to inspectors in schools don't take a look at what it's like to be a learner in that school, where in FE that happens. So I think that's almost a missed opportunity for them to say, well, what is it like to be a learner in this primary school or in this secondary school? And actually then they'll look at the community and look at the learners that are coming in. And I do feel that they do it to an extent, but it would definitely be worthwhile being taken into consideration, the impact on those outcomes, and actually measuring the outcomes against the starting point of the whole learner, not just the academic starting point. However, the work that we're doing with regards to digital technology, the well-being around staff and learners through that digital technology, and then also the tracking of the progress of learners as a whole learner as well through the technology that's available, it is already starting to have an impact. So that's really nice to see.
Good. Well, it's good to end on a little positive there, isn't it, as well? Well, my one is what's caught my eye this week is levelling up, and the government's announced this week over 100 areas where their second phase of the Levelling Up Fund has been allocated, and I'm really pleased, genuinely pleased that Blackpool, an area I still work in, secured £40 million for something called a multiversity, which is a new word. But actually, this is about robotics and AI development, and obviously Blackpool has a sort of ambition. It has some major benefits. It has lots of spare land. It has a sea. It's very windy. So there are lots of issues about where it can generate green energy and use the available land for storage, for battery storage and things like that. And it has an ambition to become something called the Silicon Sands of the UK. And I really want to support that, you know, and the £40 million will certainly go some way to encourage companies to set up business there. The thing that's really frustrated me, the two things are that for the children and young people currently in Blackpool, there is it's probably one of the most deprived communities in England, is that there is a massive digital shortfall in terms of devices, connectivity at home, and this is linked to poverty. And in effect, what we need to do is to find a mechanism whereby we can support their development of digital skills and knowledge so that they secure the jobs that may well come from this big investment. Because the worst thing for me would be if those jobs became available, but they went to young people, adults who currently don't live in Blackpool. We will not have broken this sort of cycle of opportunity or lack of opportunity that exists in the town. So I feel frustrated because also that no one told me about it. And I had the press phoning me up yesterday saying, "What do you think about it?" I said, "I have no idea. I don't know what that project is." You know, and in a way, if we're serious about this is probably the classic example of a project which is really good for the community, but being kept contained and encased within a box, and not pushing it out to seek, because clearly school leaders, teachers, we can help that delivery of that project, but actually we don't know anything. It's now dumped on us in a way. You've got to make sense of it, and actually it doesn't feel that's the right way to do it.
But doesn't it look the same with a lot of the projects around the country? I was only watching the news last night, and there's the Eden project in Morecambe, and everyone's convinced, well, that'll bring lots of employment. Will it? Have you got those skills there, or will it be employment coming in, building, and disappearing afterwards?
Yeah.
And I just looked at some of the projects, and I am a massive fan of the arts. But I thought, at this moment in time, is it really, 40 million for a theatre company? Are those really the things that we need to be doing in our communities? Or should we, and I think my view is the same as Frank, should we be giving that money to the local authorities or people who, and say,
regional mayors, whatever,
what needs to be done best to level up? And I think things like trains, stuff that's big that local authorities can't afford to do, that's what the money should be
doing. What worries me now is that yesterday, because I work for the Northern Powers Partnership, and we're not just about trains, but HS2, I don't know if I don't go down to London anymore. The train system doesn't work. I can't even rely on it to get from Cheadlehume into Manchester. But actually,
Frank, can you not get an RAF jet?
What, to go to Blackpool?
Yeah, I did see somebody put yesterday, I don't know if there's a mistake or not, that the Prime Minister had flown from Accrington to Accrington Airport. It's not one I've seen before, and I've worked in.
But the worry for me is that yesterday, when he was pushed by Sky as to, are you going to deliver on HS2, he was very, very flaky. And the thing for us, in a sense, is if we are serious about levelling up, and actually sort of that is about ensuring that the full country is able to contribute to the wealth of the country, and the full country can benefit from those that are areas that are actually fortunate to have a bit more. We need to be able to connect people to do that. And actually at the moment we have Bradford and Sheffield are terrible places to get to. I mean, I think you said here, Stan, I think to get to a meeting in Wakefield one morning.
Well, it was in Featherstone where the office was based, and to get a train to be there for 9 o'clock in the morning, I'd have to leave the previous day.
And you were only, what, 35, 40 miles away from Featherstone? It's absolutely ridiculous.
Well, potentially 3 hours by car.
Yeah. So anyway, that was me. It was lovely.
Well, I think just to go back to it's infrastructure and connectivity, whether it's roads, rail, whether it's digital,
or bus,
is where this money should be going if we are genuine about levelling up, not people's prize projects.
Ruth Lupton is Professor Ruth Lupton again at Manchester, but she did some work looking at the kids that didn't get level 4 in their GCSE in maths and English. She did some work in the northeast and in Manchester, Greater Manchester, comparing a sort of the northeast where there is quite limited bus connectivity between towns and villages. And she looked at Manchester, which she thought was going to be actually very well connected. It's got the tram system and everything. And she found that in the northeast, sadly, if you wanted to study particular courses, even though they might be very close, there simply wasn't a bus service you could use as a young person. So the impact of that. But she found similar issues in Greater Manchester, where the tram system is actually not like the London Underground, where you go north, south, east, west. Actually, the system runs north and south. It runs into the centre of Manchester and then out again. You can't cut across on the outer regions. And they were saying that that's, again, a very limiting factor for young people in terms of choosing courses. So they end up having to do a course that's a bit of it's something perhaps interesting because it's local, but it's not really what I want to do. And London has that super connectivity, which means that you have much more choice because it's easier to get around.
I think as you move out into the suburbs, and certainly even where I am, the connectivity for travel is also limited. So we actually eventually we chose to move house because our children couldn't actually go and study where they wanted to go and study. So my son wanted to study vocationally. He wanted to learn a trade in the construction industry. And he actually said, look, where I want to go, I can't get, there's no buses, there's nothing. We weren't on a train line, there was no buses. And we weren't even in the middle of nowhere. The buses just simply didn't run at the time that he needed to move. And eventually we said, look, this isn't working for all of us. We need to be more central. With regards to investment that I've experienced for the levelling up, I've been having conversations with schools that are using their Connect the Classroom funding. So and we're talking, a vast amount of funding that is available for schools. So whether that's the school may need £30,000 to fix its connectivity, because we've got so many schools that have just got black spots. So the teachers will take their laptop and they can't actually go through the door, because if they go into the next stage, they're almost talking to people across rooms because they don't go any further.
And also, if two classes are using devices at the same time, the Wi-Fi goes down.
Yeah, so if the Wi-Fi is not strong enough, so there is a lot of investment with Connect the Classroom and the different levels of that are happening. Just as an aside, all schools need to have claimed that by February 2024. So please, if that's not on your radar, please make sure that's on your radar. And then there is also the priority investment areas with regards to other digital connectivity. So Portsmouth has had a large piece of investment. I think there's 12 areas, and then there is a top 3 for that as well. So there is funding available, and I was at a meeting last night and we were discussing the variety of levels of funding for education that were around, or the ability to go through a process with perhaps Microsoft or Google or HP or whoever it may be, and it could be Apple, for example, and they'll actually then, the devices will be match funded up to £10,000, or they will be gifted, or there'll be, so there is, when I was talking last night, I think around the whole table, from what everybody said at this meeting, we're sort of hitting around the 35-40 million pound mark that was available. And it's about ensuring, and I think that's something else that people are very good at in Primary Goal, is connecting people to that funding as well. Or if the schools and the educational establishments come in and say, we've got that funding, what can we do with it? We will advise and support and signpost, because we can't support them with everything, but we can certainly signpost to the people that we know that can. And I think that's also really key to ensure that the education piece sometimes isn't always necessarily looked at from a business perspective on how to utilize that money. And it's really key about looking at that whole piece, which I think to support everybody in levelling up is something that we definitely need to take that consideration in. And like you said, the 40 million has gone in at the top end of education. We need to make sure that in that area where you are, that it definitely feeds the whole way down, and then vice versa the whole way up.
Definitely.
So. Well, one good thing I saw on Twitter, that sort of sums up how things are different over the last 3 or 4 years, and it was a former guest of ours who's a head teacher over in Frank's neck of the woods, and there's it said that because of the snow, the buses weren't running and the pavements were not very good. So for those pupils who couldn't make it into school, please log on to Google Classrooms at this time.
Yeah.
And virtually it just felt as though, and your education won't be
it's seamless. It's seamless.
And realistically, that is really how it should be. We want children to go to school and attend school for a whole variety of reasons, whether that's safeguarding, the community perspective, having the interaction with other people, communicating verbally, running around, taking part in all of those different activities that happen in that school or educational establishment environment. However, if there is anything that happens, it simply should be on you get and jump on, because it is the way of the world. It isn't the way of the future. The future's here. It will just keep improving and getting better and slicker, and that's what we need to ensure that
But
we
as Frank says, if the children in less affluent areas don't have the kits to be able to jump on, then again that widens that gap.
It does.
I'm gonna move us on, because actually we having said that we were going to do 30 to 35 minutes at the beginning, we are now well over 40 minutes, and we've still got we've got this new slot. We're not doing room 101 anymore, but we're asking our guests to identify one thing they would like to see improved for, well, I suppose it's society, but if it has an education slant, that'll be even better. But what have you chosen, Louise?
So I've chosen businesses to be affiliates to schools, and I've chosen to talk about that for a number of reasons, because the amount of schools that I've spoken to and colleges where they're struggling to get work experience placements for the learners. And we have a variety of educational courses out there that demand that those work placement pieces take place. So whether that's T-levels or one of the other vocational qualifications, it is really difficult, and the establishments put a lot of time, effort and funding into just sorting out those placements. If I take the secondary school, I'm going to use my son as an example. The school in the end had to employ somebody, and then it was from an outside business, and we were charged as parents. Wow. It was a £45 fee for them to find a work placement for our child. As it was, I said to my son, absolutely not. I'm going to be putting pen to paper.
I've never heard of that before.
It's illegal if it's part of the curriculum.
Honestly, I have to say, our guests make
it's illegal if it's part of the curriculum.
These guests, the guests bring so much variety, don't they?
Yeah. So I said to my son, would you rather the £45 in your pocket, or would you write a letter and make some phone calls and get out and about and make those contacts? I said, or what would you rather? And he's already got a very business-minded thinking process, and he said, I want £45. What do I need to do? So he earned his £45, which is a good experience for him. And then I've spoken to secondary schools in my area recently and been approached and said, is there any way that you can support us? Because pre-COVID it was, we'll consider it, or we'll maybe take one, and then actually when it comes to it now post-COVID, they just say no. And I think my thought process comes from military ships have affiliates with towns, and military ships in Portsmouth City have affiliations with schools as well. So usually each ship, depending on the size of the ship, will have anywhere between 1 and 3 schools that it's affiliated with. It's a loose affiliation, but it is there. And my thought process behind it is, and I'm going to use Portsmouth as an example because I've got the numbers easy in my mind at the moment. We've got 27,000 children, we've got 63 schools, and we've got somewhere in the region of 8,500 businesses. And there are approximately 450 of those that I would call would be heavy hitters, big players. So we've got 450 businesses and 63 schools. And in my mind, I would love to see that connectivity between businesses stepping forward and saying, actually, do you know what? We are based in this area and we will be affiliated to that primary and that secondary, or we'll be affiliated to that primary and that infant, and so on. And therefore, there is automatically that support network to provide work experience placements. And it may be that the schools need to take a look at whether they release them in a filtered fashion rather than on block. And then also there is the affiliation there with regards to levy sharing, so large businesses to the schools, and then also bigger businesses to smaller businesses, because we could even hook up a large and a small business with a school. So there is that sort of combined approach. But that's what I wanted to bring today, very much that there was that affiliated sponsorship style piece between our business community and our education community.
One thing I offered last week in our first edition of this chat, we came up with 10 things that were relatively cheap for education. One of mine was around, to give tax tax benefits to
Yeah.
businesses that actually do, reach out and offer these sorts of services, to their community. It wouldn't cost the schools anything. That was the key, but
Yeah.
it would be a benefit to the business, but it would be a massive benefit
Yeah.
to the schools.
I don't know if the businesses would get approval for a tax relief.
No, no, no,
However,
no.
perhaps I certainly worked for a large corporation in London 20, 25 years ago, and we were allowed to nominate a charity to donate time to. And so it could be from that perspective.
Yeah.
But there is definitely options there, absolutely, and opportunities.
Definitely.
It's just about people having the will to drive it forward.
Yeah.
Well, that's when to start. That is, 41 minutes of really interesting chat.
Yeah.
I think you've brought a different dimension today, Louise. I think it's been a really interesting chat, and I think people who listen to this, the conversation we have every week will agree that it's been a fascinating chat, and I'm really pleased that you've been able to join us. And also, just to plug Primary Goal, not that I'm an advocate, so I'm not dealt with not managed that process. But if you want a bit more information about what the work that Louise does, then just pump in Primary Goal into any search engine, and it pops up as your first choice. So, which I've done anyway. So thank you, Louise. Thank you, Stan. And another guest next week. And all being well, the weather will be a little bit better. Frank will be out running. Stan will be out walking.
Yeah.
The cardigan.
Well, on the south coast, I might be out sunbathing. You never know, but not quite yet. So, but thank you very much for having me.
It's been
a pleasure.
an absolute pleasure for us as well. And to all our followers, we'll see you all being well next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.